Hi everyone! Thank you so much for joining in on my lesson plan. I am going to go ahead and go over my first grade science plant life cycle lesson plan. The standard that I'm going to be going over is add drawings or other visual displays to descriptions when appropriate to clarify ideas, thoughts, and feelings. So if we break down this standard, we're going to be asking the students to add and clarify their thoughts. What they're going to be adding is drawing or other visual displays, and what they're going to be clarifying is their ideas, thoughts, and feelings. So again, this is for a first grade classroom, so it is a little bit less in depth, but we are going to definitely hit all of these standards in our lesson plan today. So, the learning intentions that I'm going to be going over with my students and hopefully obtaining by the end of this lesson plan will be that students will be able to understand the life cycle of a plant. Students will be able to understand vocabulary associated with plant life cycle. Students will observe and describe how plants use soil, water, and sunlight to grow. Students will observe and describe the life cycle of a plant, starting as a seed and ending up as a plant. And students will be able to draw the four main elements of the plant life cycle and put them in the correct sequence start to finish. So this is just one introductory lesson into plant life cycle. So I'm just getting my students familiar with vocabulary. I'm getting them to understand, the four main elements that are associated, and they're going to be putting these four main elements into a sequence so that they understand from start to finish what happens with the plant life cycle. So the assessments that are going to be happening throughout my lesson plan, one is going to be happening throughout the lesson plan, which will be a check-in with my students of either thumbs up or thumbs down. I will go in more depth into this later on when I describe how and where that's going to be associated in my lesson plan. The second is going to be a formative assessment that will be given at the end of the lesson, which will be a plant life cycle form. On this form, students are going to be asked to draw, label, and correctly put the four elements, which are a seed, the roots sprouting from a seed, a plant with buds, and a plant with flowers or full grown. And then this assessment will be collected at the end of my lesson plan so that I can have a better understanding of my students' needs and if they're understanding what is the content that's being introduced to them. So again, the first assessment will be happening throughout the lesson plan and the second will happen at the end, and I do have a rubric to grade that, so I'll go over that at the end or near the end of this as well. All right, so let's dig right in. So for my students, we will be going over a story. I have linked, if you click right on here, it will take you right to the YouTube of the reading of this story. So that's really helpful.
Hello and welcome back
So my students, I will be hopefully implementing a flipped classroom in my classroom, so I will be sending this link out to my students the night before so that they can get familiar with the text and ask any questions if they have any, and kind of get familiar with the vocab that we're going to be talking about. So let's just go back over here. And back to present. Okay, so that is going to be the story time. Again, this will go over prior knowledge and word association. Secondly, in our lesson plan, we're going to do a vocabulary overview. So I will come to the front of the classroom and ask students to call out words that they know that are associated to plant life. Some that I mentioned here are roots, sprouting, and leaves. Some of these words might seem like the word leave. A student who might not know English as their first language might know a different leave as in somebody is leaving the room and not just a leaf on a plant. Again, this is a first grade classroom, so I have to be thinking about everything and all of my students and making sure that they're all having the same sort of prior knowledge and understanding coming into this lesson plan. So the vocabulary overview will give us a good idea and a way for all the students to participate and ask if they have any questions. So these are just two forms that are images that I will be going over also with my students. They kind of just break down simply what is happening in the life cycle of a plant, starting as a seed, ending and then turning into a sprout, seeding, and then ending up as a plant itself. I also have a quick link here so that we can go over a video of more in depth from seed to flower. Again, this will also be sent out to my students the night before so that they can watch it and feel familiar when they come to class the next day. I think this is a great way for students to come to class ready with any questions or if they have any concerns. Also, it is a way for them to watch this content with their parents and maybe gain some more understanding or knowledge before coming into the classroom. Okay. And then next is going to be the assessment. So this is actually the plant life cycle form that I talked about earlier. So my students will be broken off into pairs and they will each be given this form. So they will draw and label and correctly put the 4 elements into these squares here. This is where the check-in of thumbs up, thumbs down will happen. Since my students will be in pairs, I will be walking around the classroom and asking them to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if they're struggling with the assignment. If they are giving me a thumbs down, or if either one of the 2 students is, I will sit down and go over any questions that the students are having and hopefully give them that clarification that they're in need of. This is a way, again, for me to be giving that assessment throughout the lesson and making sure that students are understanding. Again, the students will be asked to draw a label and put the 4 elements of the plant life in the correct sequence on this form here. This is the rubric that I did create, so you'll see that there is the 3 main elements of the drawing, the writing, and the sequencing that's happening on the previous form. There's 4 areas of grading that I will be doing. You know, fourth, if they're getting the full 4 points, it's probably that they are drawing all of the elements correctly, labeling them correctly, and putting them in the correct sequence. And then it goes down from there, so if maybe they're missing just one of these elements, or if they're, you know, not labeling them correctly, then the rubric or grading will go down there. So if you guys want to look at that for a second, I also have that added into my performance task form. Okay, so lastly, I really want to make sure that my students are making real-world connections. So to do so in the end of this lesson plan, once the plant life cycle form is complete and turned into the teacher, I will give each student a small seed that they will then put into a mini pot that I have provided for each of my students. Each student is going to label their name on it, and we will actually be looking at the growth of these plants over the next few weeks. So I've actually added here just a chart that I will be using with my students so that they can measure their plant's height over a matter of 5 weeks. So the next week when we come in, we'll go ahead and look at this, and each student will jot down the number of inches that their plant is now at. I will also use this chart later in the unit so we can look at math lessons incorporated with our growth chart. So it's a great element to use for both studies. And then at the end of this lesson, we will come back together and make educated guesses on how we think our plants will grow over the next 5 weeks. I will obviously start getting them to think about how sunlight, water, and soil all contribute to the growth of their plant, and we'll get their kind of wheels turning to be thinking about what they think will happen to their plant if it does have sunlight, if it does not have sunlight, if it does have water, or if it does not have water. So this is an exciting unit, and again, this is just our first introductory into the plant life cycle, so I'm excited for my students to get into it and excited, and I hope you guys followed along and enjoyed it as well. Thank you. Have a good one.